Before the United States was founded in 1776, the American colonies were basically part of Great Britain. But there were two men in the colonies who really dominated as leaders. Those two men were Jonathan Edwards and Benjamin Franklin. And I want to talk about each one of them separately here as we continue on. Let's start with Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was born in New England. He was born to a Puritan family in 1703. But this kid was smart. He was very, very prodigious. He started his college at age 12 at Yale University. He started reading Locke, reading the Enlightenment philosophers and theologians, Calvin and Luther, and many of the more difficult texts to read. He started even writing his own philosophy about age 12 or 13. There's a document called the Resolutions, which is incredibly powerful, worth reading. Most of his philosophy surrounded the idea that our lives are very, very short, and we should make the most of every minute of our lives. His resolutions almost all say, live every day as if it's your last day. This is you're never closer to the grave than you are at any given moment. Well, I'm older today than I have ever been, and keep that in mind. Life is very short. So that was Jonathan Edwards' sort of his main focus. When he was a very young man, he feared lightning. He was afraid of lightning. He always ran away from it. But he said he was converted around age 16 or 17 when he accepted the Calvinistic understanding of a predestined universe. And when he embraced the concept of predestination, he began to love everything about the universe, particularly lightning. He would go out and dance in these lightning storms, saying, if it's my day, then God will take me, and if it's not my day, this lightning won't hurt me at all. After he graduated, he took a job as a pastor in his grandfather's church. His grandfather was a very famous Puritan named Solomon Stoddard. It was the church at Northampton, Massachusetts. And then when Stoddard died, he became the head pastor. Now, here's what got him in a little bit of trouble, particularly with his church. You may remember we talked about the Puritans in the time of decline. They accepted people as halfway members who weren't willing to go through the whole process of being examined for church membership. Well, Jonathan Edwards didn't like the halfway covenant, and he rejected anybody as a member who had not actually done the entire process of the examination by the elders. Because of that, his church was split. Some who believed in the halfway covenant wanted to hold on to it, and some who followed Jonathan Edwards' new way. And so he was essentially fired from that first church. But at the same time, as he's up there preaching in his grandfather's pulpit, and then in other churches, he touches off the Great Awakening with his sermons that are so strong and so rigid. His most famous sermon is actually called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Also, there was a sermon called God Glorified in the Damnation of Sinners. They say when Edwards preached, people were just shaking with nervousness, with anxiety and fear. And he was the man who made New England quake and shake and caused the Great Awakening. Now, he wrote a book about the Great Awakening called The Surprising Work of Revival in New England Caused by the Holy Spirit. And his explanation was it had nothing to do with him or with Whitefield or Wesley or with earthquakes. It had entirely to do with the Holy Spirit causing all of these conversions. When George Whitefield came to New England, he became friends with Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards convinced Whitefield of predestination, and then Whitefield wrote back to his friend Wesley, who didn't believe in predestination, that Wesley was all wrong. Wesley and Whitefield then had a huge falling out. They wouldn't even say hello to each other for a while because they disagreed on the subject of free will and predestination. Wesley holding on to the doctrine of free will, and Whitefield, after being taught by Jonathan Edwards, became a Calvinist himself and lived the rest of his life as a very strong Calvinist. Now, after he lost his pulpit at Northampton, Jonathan Edwards was, for a short period of time, he became a missionary to the American Indians in West Massachusetts, out in Stockbridge. And at that point, he began to write a book called The Freedom of the Will, in which he rejected the idea entirely. It was a very conclusive refutation of those like Wesley who believed in the freedom of the will. It's a beautiful document. It's worth reading. I mean, basically, it hinges on a number of logical conclusions, but one is that, look, if God knows the future, if God knows what kind of tie I'm going to wear tomorrow, am I free to fake God out and wear a different tie? Edwards would say, no. The tie that I'm going to wear tomorrow is already in God's mind, and therefore it's predestined. All the future is predestined to be as it is. Therefore, we should take solace in that. We should take comfort in that. We should be serene because we live in the hands of a sovereign God. Well, while he was a missionary to the Indians in Stockbridge, he was given the invitation to become the president of the College of New Jersey, what we know today as Princeton University. And so indeed, he accepted that appointment, just as he's publishing that book, The Freedom of the Will, actually published by Franklin. But when he got to Princeton, the Enlightenment scientists kind of got to him and they said, okay, we have this controversy, we talked about this last time, about whether or not we should take smallpox inoculations. And Jonathan Edwards, although he was a minister, he didn't side with those who said this is playing God. He believed that the smallpox inoculation was part of God's providence. God had predestined that the inoculations take place. So he was much in favor of it. So those who were trying to promote inoculation said, well, Dr. Edwards, you can really help us out here. You can help us make a point by being yourself a recipient of the inoculation. And indeed, he said, that makes sense to me. He inoculated himself with smallpox, and within 3 months of him coming to Princeton, he had died, because when you inject yourself with a little bit of that disease, you do always run the risk of perhaps contracting that which you're trying to inoculate yourself against. And indeed, that's what happened. Edwards is buried there today, right outside of Princeton University, where he died at an early age of mid-50s. Edwards really was a combination of a Puritan, an Enlightenment thinker, and the First Great Awakening all in one. His predecessor, Witherspoon, went on to become a major part of the Founding Fathers. If Jonathan Edwards had not inoculated himself to death, who knows what he would have gone on to do in the formation of the United States. That's counterfactual history. We can never know, but we know that his predecessor at Princeton, John Witherspoon, was a very influential figure at the Second Continental Congress, and even in through the formation of the Constitution. But this man, Jonathan Edwards, his impact on early American history, ideology, and religion cannot be overestimated.